Welcome to this session of the Tourette Association's virtual conference. I'm Evie Contolis, Development Associate and Team Tourette Manager at the Tourette Association of America. Thank you for joining us today for What Am I Missing? IEP/504 Plan Process Simplified. We would like to take this opportunity to thank our Platinum sponsors, the Warner Fund and Pharma, as well as all of our donors and supporters for making this free conference possible. To support educational programming like this, you may visit tourette.org/donate to make a contribution today. During this session, we would be very happy to hear from you and include your voice in the conversation. You may ask questions or share comments using the question panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player at any time. The chat function on the bottom, disregard that. We will collect your questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Kathy Giordano.
Thank you. And thank you for all attending. It's been a long day, so I'm glad we have so many attending. All right, so I'll start with the slides. Oops, let me get rid of that. So what am I missing? IEP and 504. I'm going to talk about specific things, because if I talked about the entire IEP 504 process simplified, it would be a lot. So let me move on to my slides. So misperceptions, and there are many misperceptions regarding eligibility for IEP and 504 plans. I'm not exactly sure why there's so many misperceptions, because the law is pretty clear, and I'm going to be referring to some of the things that might surprise you, because there are a lot of misperceptions. So don't let anybody tell you that the grades are too good. There's actually a quote from the director of the Office of Special Education Programming, saying determining about whether a child is a child with a disability is not limited to information about the child's academic performance. So again, I'll be talking a little bit more about that. His or her scores are too high on the evaluations, so he or she is not going to be eligible for an IEP or 504. Not true. Not true. You're eligible for an IEP to meet the unique needs, and the 504 plans I'll talk later about as well, and it's really a civil right, so it has nothing to do with whether or not you score high. Actually, it's a good thing if the kids score high on the evaluations, because that proves that they have a lot of capabilities. And if they score high on the evaluations but are not getting good grades, then something's wrong. You may hear we have many other students with more significant needs. I would suggest that you can respond to that by saying that you understand that may be true, but you're advocating for your child, and this meeting is about your child. So it really that shouldn't be said, but if it is, just don't get angry. It's never a really good idea to get angry at IEP or 504 meetings. But just make clear that this meeting is about your child, not about other children. Another thing you might hear, you don't want your child moved to special education. Believe it or not, people will tell you that, and I don't think people tell you things, purposely to upset you. I think they truly believe this. And they are, telling you to try to help you. But special education is a philosophy. It's not a location. So if your child is put on an IEP and has some special education services, that doesn't mean that the child is going to be moved to a different setting. Most kids with Tourette that require some special education services remain in the general ed setting. A lot of services can be provided in the general ed setting, or it may be that the child goes out to consultant teacher or goes out for counseling. That doesn't mean that he's going to go to a classroom that is specifically for students who require special education services. And then you may hear he will have a stigma for the rest of his life. That's not true either. IEPs, the IEP stands for Independent Evaluation Program. A lot of people will say that it stands for individual education plans. It's really individual education program because it involves the whole program that the special education services are going to provide. So it ends after 12th grade. A 504 plan actually can go on after 12th grade, and a 504 plan after school actually can be of help because you can bring a 504 plan to college with you, or you can potential employers show that that this service, this accommodation, this modification, really simple, helped you. But an IEP really ends after 12th grade. The only people that can see that you are on an IEP are people that either the parents or the child, after the child turns 18, gives permission to see the school records. So it really is not going to follow the child into his adult life. You can take a copy of the IEP to college if you attend college and bring it to the disability office, because it may be helpful for the disability office to develop a 504 plan that the college professors, the college will want to meet. Some of the accommodations in college may be taking a test in a separate location. Something pretty simple, or extended time, things like that. So what are we missing in IEPs and 504s? The main thing we're missing is that students with Tourette who have making good grades, they actually are eligible for an IEP and or a 504 plan. I know this statement is a little controversial, but it really shouldn't be. I've been doing advocacy and working with families with Tourette syndrome in schools for over 35 years. And I used to work with an attorney whose office was right next to mine. And so I got to study the law a lot. And if you really understand the laws, students with Tourette, even when they're making good grades, they still might be eligible for an IEP or a 504 plan. Now, don't fall under the false assumption that anybody that has a diagnosis of Tourette is automatically eligible for an IEP or a 504 plan, because that's not true. You have to meet the eligibility for an IEP or a 504 plan. But I remember there was a young man that contacted me for assistance, and he was in high school and making straight A's. He was on the honor roll, but he was spending like 8-9 hours every night doing homework. And so he applied for a 504 plan, and he actually was given the 504 plan for a reduced amount of homework. So just because he was making good grades didn't mean that he was ineligible. So I'm going to say this probably too many times. You're going to get tired of hearing it. Academics do not have to be impacted to be eligible for either an IEP or a 504 plan. Really, honest. So the federal laws for IEPs, and this is a quote, IDEA and the regulations clearly establish that the determination about whether a child is a child with a disability is not limited to information about the child's academic performance. Now, a lot of people will say, that it needs to impact their education performance. And another quote, the courts have established that a child's educational needs include academics, but they also include social, health, emotional, communicative, physical, and vocational needs. So it's really when people tell you that it has to impact their academic performance, it really is not. It's really their educational performance or their educational needs. And schools, their purpose is to educate people and get them ready for either college or for life after school. And that's not just academics. So it may be that a child has major social skills difficulties. So an IEP may be written, may be developed to meet the child's social skills through working with a speech therapist or with somebody learning the skills necessary to have better social interactions. So it really, honest, I know this is hard to believe, but it really truly is not just the academics. So when they're developing an IEP, again, this is from the federal law. When the IEP is being developed, in developing each child's IEP, the IEP must, IDEA that governs IEPs doesn't say must very often. So it's saying here that the team must consider the strengths of the child, which makes sense, the concerns of the parents for enhancing the education, the results of the initial or most recent evaluation. But for kids with Tourette that are bright, the last one may be the most important, the academic, the developmental, and the functional needs. And the federal government defines functional needs as being routine activities of everyday living. And that's taken right from the commentary in the Federal Register. So that's federal law. Functional needs could be sensory. A child may, have really difficult sensory needs. May have executive functioning, organization. So it may be totally different needs than the academics. Now you got a kid with Tourette, so there's a lot of things that come into impacting a student with Tourette syndrome, and a lot of it is misunderstood. So the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, estimate that about 86% of the people diagnosed with Tourette have other diagnoses. So ADHD is way up there. Behavioral issues, and I'm going to focus on that a tiny bit later on because Tourette is so misunderstood that a lot of times there's issues related to some challenging behaviors, depression, anxiety, the autism spectrum, speech and language. Kids with Tourette, they have a lot of issues going on. And so many of them also have some obsessive compulsive behaviors. And Dr. Kathy Budman, who is a highly respected physician dealing with students and people with Tourette, she estimates that about 25% have this neurological rage difficulties. So it's really, kids with Tourette are quite a package. And if they're getting good grades, but dealing with all this other stuff that's kind of interfering with their everyday living, then they may be eligible for an IEP. Here's a quote that I wish I knew exactly who said it. I have researched it. I can't find. I like to give credit to people that have these quotes that I use. So it often intellectual abilities disguise skill deficits in elementary school. But in the higher grades, the skill deficits begin to disguise intelligence. If you listened to Dr. Ross Green's presentation this morning, he talked a lot about skills deficits. If you didn't listen to it and you are a parent or a teacher or somebody that works with a young person with Tourette syndrome, I would highly recommend that you listen to it. I know they recorded it and it's going to be on the website or the YouTube page, Dr. Ross Green's presentation this morning, because talking about skills deficits, you know, again, I've worked with thousands and thousands of kids with Tourette, and so many of them really do well in elementary school. But then they get into like 5th grade, 4th grade, things start lots of times turning downhill. 5th grade, things can really go south. And then you get into junior high and even more difficulties. It's not that they're not motivated. It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they're not trying. It's just that the skills deficits that weren't obvious when they were in elementary school, because the kids were able to cover up their skills deficits because they're so bright and they're so capable. So their skills deficits don't always show in elementary. The one exception to that is handwriting, or getting thoughts from the brain to the paper. Many kids with Tourette do have difficulties with dysgraphia, or getting thoughts from the brain to the paper. Lots of kids, you know, I'll talk to parents and they'll say, oh no, you know, my child's handwriting is perfect. And I'll say, what grade are they in? And, you know, they're in 2nd grade and their handwriting is perfect. And I'll say, how perfect? Because in 1st grade and 2nd grade, lots of times kids are drawing their letters. And if they have any kind of obsessive compulsiveness for perfectionism, they will want to draw the letters pretty perfectly. And then they get into 4th grade and 5th grade, where there's a whole lot more expected of them as far as writing goes. And so they're not able to, you know, perfectly draw each letter. So typically, and almost everything with Tourette is typically, the handwriting issues really become a major factor starting around 4th grade, 5th grade. Not unusual. And what we recommend is that to replace handwriting and to have a 504 or an IEP if you have an IEP, but having on the 504 that the child has reduced handwriting tasks, and if possible, really chalk up and really work on the keyboarding. Now, back when I first started doing this 30 years ago, it was, you know, we'd have to recommend that they'd have a computer. But now a lot of kids have the tablets or, you know, different ways to get their thoughts down on paper rather than just handwriting. So, you know, that's an important thing to remember when you're asking for supports for kids with Tourette. And please remember, if you do see a downward, if you see the grades start going down in junior high, it's not because the kids, you know, don't want to try anymore, or because, you know, they're in junior high. And I used to be a junior high teacher, and so I know junior high kids. You know, it's that they want to be successful. It's just that all of a sudden their deficits start disguising their intellectual abilities. So please remember that, and it really hits 6th grade and up. So kids with Tourette, obviously they have tics, and which are stressful and very exhausting. So imagine the daily difficulties of all the other disorders that are unrecognized or unsupported. Probably most of you have seen this iceberg. It seems to be pretty popular amongst the Tourette world. So it's, you know, we see the motor tics, we hear the vocal tics, but what's underneath is what may need the support. Again, the handwriting issues is big. The attention deficit, the anxiety, the obsessive compulsive behaviors, which is different than obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive compulsive behaviors are more typical. They seem more like tics. They're because of urges. So if somebody has to touch something 5 times, it's because of that urge. Social communication. There's just so many other related disorders that can impact and get in the way of a child with Tourette being successful. And IEPs and 504s are to meet the unique needs of the student. So the unique needs of a person with Tourette, the obsessive compulsive or the social deficits or the handwriting or the sensory or disinhibition, you know, all of that may be much more troublesome than the motor tics and the vocal tics. So when you're asking for an IEP or a 504 and people will say, well, you know, his motor tics and his vocal tics, his Tourette really doesn't impact him that much. Well, his tics might not, but his Tourette symptoms do. And I've sort of gotten away from talking, when I talk about Tourette's symptoms, I talk about the symptoms, not so much about the tics, because what we hear all the time is, you know, well, I don't see any tics, so he must not have Tourette. Well, symptoms, and it's the symptoms that are the unique symptoms of the kid is what the IEPs and the 504s need to focus on, which, you know, again, may not be the academics. So is the kid being oppositional or chronically inflexible? Dr. Ross Green, who I have known Dr. Ross Green for over 30 years. My son with major Tourette is now 38, and I first became aware of him when my son was 8 years old. He is incredible. So if a kid is being oppositional or being inflexible, and if you listen to his talk this morning, you would have heard the same thing. The key is to discover the factors that are behind the child's inflexibility and poor frustration tolerance, which may require a comprehensive assessment. I love the way this morning he focused on not focusing on the behavior as much as focusing on why and when the behavior occurs. Because if we just focus on the behaviors, we're never going to be able to get the information we need to help the kid overcome, to be successful, so that the behaviors will calm down. So it may require a comprehensive assessment. So if you're looking for a 504 or an IEP, you want to, in writing, please, in writing, and I don't even think I would email it or type it. The IDEA says it has to be in handwriting, a request for an assessment or an evaluation. The thing that the law says is that the school must provide an assessment and evaluation for all the concerns of the parent. If the parent has concerns that the child may need special education for this specific concern, then the school needs to do an evaluation of it, if that's within their tenure. So when you write a letter, and when you write a letter requesting an evaluation or an assessment, or if you're just writing a letter requesting an IEP meeting, they're going to do an evaluation and an assessment. So include what you think needs to be assessed. So if a kid is really unorganized, say that the child is unorganized. If he has, if you think there's memory issues, mention that there's memory issues. Or if he doesn't seem to, he asked 3 or 4 times for you to repeat what he's saying, he may have processing delays. You don't have to say processing delays. You can say that he needs instructions repeated over and over again. That's your concern, and then that has to be evaluated. Now this slide, I'm showing this because assessments and evaluations are so critically important when we're looking at a kid who has challenging behaviors. We too often, I've been to a zillion different IEP meetings, and we look at the total IQ score to determine if the student needs support. I don't look at that. So a kid may have an IQ, an overall IQ of 100, which is average. 100 is an average IQ. And he's getting, you know, C's, C minuses, and the people will say, well, he's got an average IQ, so he's getting the grades that he should be getting with that kind of an IQ. No. When you ask for an assessment and an evaluation, make sure that that testing, you see that, you get a copy of that before the meeting. Because what you want to do is you want to have a meeting, number one, with the person that did the assessment, but you want to look at the subtests. And people testing talks about subtesting in a variety of ways. So let's first talk about the testing that goes with percentages. Okay, so the kid's got a reading ability in the 90th percentile and a reading comprehension in the 15th percentile. So the reading ability, 90 percentile means that he has a reading ability better than 90% of the other students his age in his grade in the United States. So that's pretty good. 90 percentile is way up there. He's better than 90% of other students his age, but reading comprehension is 15%. So 85% of the people of other students his age have better comprehension than him. He's only got a 15 percentile, which is really, really low. So you look at that. So he's reading okay, you know, he can read, but he's not comprehending. So that is going to impact his ability to demonstrate his true abilities. Math facts. So we'll go down to the grade equivalency. So on a grade equivalency, they don't use the percentiles, they use the grades. So this kid has math facts that are equal to a 12th grader, but his fluency, how he can use those math facts, is at the 3rd grade level. And he also may have processing delays in the that are in the 5th grade level. So huge discrepancy. Brilliant. I mean, the kid. So the kid, say let's say the kid is in 5th grade, and he's got math equivalent to a 12th grader, but he's able to use his math facts as a 3rd grader. So extraordinary. Again, he's not able to show his true abilities. Or you can go with the age equivalency. So the general knowledge, he has like a 16-year-old, but written language is as an 8-year-old. So again, what you want to look for, you want to look for these numbers that are off, that are variable. But you take it and you put it all together and you average it out, and the IQ comes out to being average. So at the IEP meeting or a 504 meeting, what people are going to say is that he has average abilities. Well, he's reading at the 90th percentile. That's not average. He's, in the 5th grade with a 12th grade level of math. He's advanced, but the other scores that are lower bring the IQ down. So some people will say, well, it averages out. No, it doesn't, because if a kid is really going to show his abilities, he needs to have the reading comprehension. So he may need assistance on the IEP. He may be getting C's. He may be getting okay grades, but that's not equal to his true ability. If he's in say the 5th grade and has math at the 12th grade level, but he's doing 5th grade work and he's getting C's or D's in 5th grade, he should be getting A's. He should be doing much better because he has the abilities of a 12th grader. So my point is, when you have an evaluation and an assessment, sometimes it's called a psychoeducational evaluation, look at the subtests and then make an appointment with the person who did the testing and highlight anything that you have questions about. So if you're going to have a meeting with the school psychologist that did the evaluation, highlight reading ability 90 percentile, reading comprehension 15 percentile. Ask the school psychologist about that. Ask how that impacts the child. So some of the common IEP supports, and we could go on for pages on different supports, but some of the common ones are a speech pathologist or a counselor for social skills, consultant teacher. Consultant teachers I find really important for kids with Tourette, particularly when they get into the junior high and high school, because a consultant teacher can help the child manage their homework, help the student figure out, okay, you've got a test on Friday, but you got this assignment here on Monday that needs to be due by Tuesday. So let's focus on this assignment right now. We can study for the test that's going to be on Friday later on. So homework management, as well as assisting with executive function skills. Executive function skills are the organization, the ability to take a task and come up with a product. It takes a lot of organization. And if the child is not organized, does not have good executive function skills, then a lot of times their homework suffers, their testing suffers. But there's no average, this is what you do for executive function skills. It really needs to be individualized, as all things with kids with Tourette need to be individualized. So the consultant teacher doesn't actually teach the kid executive function skills. The consultant teacher helps the child develop the executive function skills that particular student, that work for that kid. I know my son, for a while, he had Post-it notes. And so he would, in the morning, he would write his task on a Post-it note and have it on his desk. And as he finished each task, he would remove the note. That kept him organized. That helped with his executive function skills. Individualized. It has to be individualized. So consultant teachers are really important for kids with Tourette. School counselor, maybe for social skills groups, but be very careful about social skills groups, because A lot of social skills groups are set up to help students that are on the autism spectrum, and they have different social skills deficits than kids with Tourette. Tourette typically know how to respond and know how to act. That it's just that in the moment they don't do it, and usually it's related to anxiety. So a school counselor can help a child with Tourette learn to recognize their anxiety and learn what to do to reduce the anxiety so that they can be appropriate in social groups, which would be very different from a social skills group that's a mixture of kids with Tourette and ADD and kids that are on the spectrum. Kids with ADD and Tourette would probably be similar. So the school counselor can also help manage anxiety, as well as maybe coming up with some strategies on how to manage their tics. And you know, I always use the word manage because people with Tourette can't control their tics, they can't stop their tics, but sometimes, depending on the specific symptom, the specific tic, it is something that needs to be managed. I remember I spoke to a social worker, I think, out in Arizona maybe, and she told me about a boy that she was working with over the summer that had a inappropriate touching tic. So he would inappropriately touch females. Now this is something that needed some management. This is not something you could ignore. I mean, a lot of times we say, you know, ignore tics, and there are many that you can ignore, but you also want to help the kid get prepared for life after school, and touching people inappropriately is not a good plan. So this woman was trying to help him figure out a way to manage this inappropriate touching. And what they came up with together, and it wasn't like she thought of it and told him to do this. They worked on this together, and they came up with the idea that every time he had the urge, and of course, symptoms of Tourette are all, you know, urges, very strong urges. When he had the urge to touch somebody, he learned to take his hands and put them behind his back and hold his hands. And for him, that worked. Now, I'm not suggesting that that would work for every person that has inappropriate touching symptoms, but it worked for him. And it was, I don't know, it may have been a school counselor, it may have been a nurse, I don't remember, but somebody at the school, and it could be the counselor, could help develop strategies for managing the tics that need to be managed. The tics that are harmful to the person or harmful to somebody else, or so majorly inappropriate that it's not going to be good when they get out of school. And a lot of kids have on their IEPs that they will work with an occupational therapist, because a lot of kids with Tourette do have sensory integration needs. Either they get overwhelmed very easily, or they need more input. So these are the kids that will hurt themselves. You know, they'll bite themselves, or they'll keep scratching at a scab until it bleeds. These are kids that they need, their brain, in order to be balanced, needs more sensory input. And again, there's no quick fix. So I hear a lot of times, well, you know, we gave him some fidgets. We gave him this special thing to sit on, and that may help some kids, but Tourette is individualized. It might not help everyone. So a good occupational therapist will have different strategies for the child to use, to either be able to be in a setting where he's overwhelmed by sensory, or that he needs additional sensory input. that would be an occupational therapist. And a resource room teacher would be some safe place for a student to go for to take testing and to support with specific academic skills. Okay, 504 plans. 504 plans are civil rights laws. They're not education laws, they are civil rights laws. So it doesn't it doesn't have to impact the academics in order to be eligible for a 504 plan. 504 plans are based on the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it was majorly updated in the 2008 Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act. There's an article on the website about this if you're interested. It's really pretty important, the changes that they made, and I'll talk about some of them. So 504 plans provide services. They can provide special education services. They usually don't, because IEPs receive funding from the government. 504 plans don't receive any kind of funding. So 504 plans are, it's all on the school. So usually special education services, even though they can be provided 504, typically are not. If you need the special education services, it's probably going to bounce up to an IEP. But mostly what 504 plans provide are accommodations and modifications, so that the students with disabilities receive equal access to a free and appropriate public education from schools that receive federal funding. Oh, I misplaced the and on that. It should be free and appropriate public education, sorry. So accommodations would be using a keyboard, or having notes provided, or having less homework, having reduced writing. Those would be accommodations. Modification, actually the reduced homework and the reduced work would be actually modifications, sorry. Accommodations are more physical things, like the keyboard, or you know, walking out to get a drink of water. Modifications are modifying the work. So the modifications would be reducing homework, or reducing written work, or reducing math problems. Modifications are modifying the actual school work, where accommodations are providing things that will help the child, help the student receive equal access. And that is so important, equal access. An example I like to use is a student with Tourette and a student without Tourette are both in the same classroom and taking notes. Well, the student with Tourette has a very difficult time taking notes, and after he's done and takes them home, he can't read them. But the child without Tourette is fine taking notes. He goes home, he reads from his notes, studies for the test, and is able to study for the test because he can read his notes just fine. Whereas the kid with Tourette doesn't really have equal access because he can't read his notes. So this is, see the inequity. The kid with Tourette can't study his notes. The kid without Tourette can easily study his notes. So it's to provide accommodations and modifications so that a person with disabilities can receive equal access to a free and appropriate public education from schools that receive federal funding. So all the public schools receive federal funding. It gets a little tricky when you get into the more religious schools. Whether or not they receive federal funding or not is something that you know, is questionable. But a lot of private schools will still give some 504 accommodations and modifications. They don't have to. By law, they don't have to, but lots of times they will. Once again, does not have to impact academics to be eligible. Kids that are very, very bright are eligible for a 504 plan. Kids that get very good grades are eligible for 504 plans. The eligibility for a 504 plan, the law says that the disability must substantially limit one or more major life activity. I said before that the 2008 Americans with Disabilities Act was really important. And one of the reasons it was really important was because a lot in the federal government wrote the reason they wanted to highlight the word substantially was because they found out that a lot of schools were not using the terminology substantially, but they were using the terminology significantly. Now, there's a difference between a disability significantly impacting and a disability that's substantially impacting. Substantially means truly. So is it truly impacting? But I mean, it's not. So if I'm using crutches, that's substantially impacting my ability to walk. But if I can't use my legs at all, then that's significantly impacting. So it really is, it's an important difference that the federal government felt was so important that they highlighted it. And it limits one or more major life activity. So what are some examples of major life activities? The law actually listed some, but they also made it clear that this was not, complete list. There could be other major life activities, but I'm going to talk about the ones they stated in the law that are particularly important for kids with Tourette. So one of the ones they listed in the law, one of the major life activities is communication. Students with Tourette almost always have some kind of communication difficulty. So if you've got some vocal tics that are interfering, or if you've got stuttering, which can be a symptom of Tourette, or if you've got the copialia, which is the inappropriate statements, that's impacting your ability to communicate. And physical tics that can impact writing, because writing is communication. So anything that substantially impacts communication would make the student eligible for a 504 plan. Concentrating, thinking. These are both listed in the law as major life activities that can require a 504 plan. So executive functioning, ADD, obsessive compulsive, processing delays, these all can impact concentrating and thinking. When I used to work at an advocacy center, and when the 2008, when the law was changed, we had somebody come in and talk to us about the changes that were made to the law. And at the end of talking, he said, "Can you believe that the law actually wrote in concentrating and thinking? I mean, everybody. And, I can't believe that they are allowing people that are having a hard time concentrating to get a 504 plan." And I raised my hand and I said, "You're talking to the wrong crowd. We're happy about this. We're happy that they're finally allowing concentrating and thinking. If it's impacted, then it's a major life activity." Reading. If a student has eye blinking or arm tics, some students have to count words. Some students have difficulties with attention. I know a lot of students can read a whole page and not remember any of it and have to go back and read the whole thing again because their attention was someplace else. So if reading is impacted, they're eligible for a 504 plan. And I wrote down learning. Learning is one of the major life activities because it says in the law that if the student is not learning to their true capabilities, then that may make them eligible for a 504 plan. So again, if we go back to the evaluations and we see that a kid is in the 90th percentile, but is not learning to their true capabilities, then they may need a 504 plan. So what are we missing in section 504? I think IEP is better well understood. I think 504 is highly misunderstood. That it's a civil rights law, it's not education, and it's intended to provide equal access. Another thing that people don't recognize a whole lot is that the law says it only needs to impact one of the major life activities. So if reading is impacted, but learning isn't, then they can still get a 504 plan. So if writing is impacted, but their test scores come out fine, they still may be eligible because one of the major life activities were impacted. So people will say, well, yeah, okay, his handwriting is bad, but he's getting good grades. Doesn't matter. One of the major life activities was impacted. This, I think they may have written this law in 2008, specifically for kids with Tourette, because one of the sections of the laws talks about the fact that the symptoms can be episodic and they can be inconsistent. The one thing about Tourette is the inconsistency and episodic. So symptoms wax and wane, they're inconsistent. So if you go to a 504, I've seen where a student will have some pretty major symptoms that are interfering, and so they schedule a 504 meeting, and in the meantime, the symptoms get quieter, and so at the 504 meeting, they say, well, he's not having these symptoms now, so we can't write a 504. Yes, you can, because the law says that they can be episodic and they can be inconsistent. They also can be managed by medications or by strategies. So if you've got this one wonderful teacher that has strategies that help with the symptoms, that doesn't mean that they're not eligible for a 504 plan, because it says if the symptoms were to substantially impact when without the medications or without the strategies, then they are still eligible. Okay, for the 50th time, doesn't have to impact academics. I'm not sure where this got all messed up, where people really do believe that it has to impact academics. It's a civil rights law. It's not an education law. It's civil rights so that your child has equal access. So I pretty much think that all students with Tourette should be eligible for a 504 plan. I know that they're denied a lot. I know that over the years, as I've been working with schools and with parents, many students are denied 504 plans. But it's rare that I talk to a parent or a school about a student that has Tourette that really isn't eligible for 504. Almost all of them are, even if it's only because of handwriting. And in my 30 years, I rarely met a student with Tourette that doesn't have some difficulty getting thoughts from the brain to the paper. So some of the common 504 plans are reduced workload. Testing in a separate location can be helpful for some, but not for all. Be careful when you look at accommodations and modifications, because recognize that every kid is unique. So a lot of times we'll see that yes, a separate location or taking a break is good for kids with Tourette. It might be good for one kid, but another kid may hate taking a test in a separate location. So it really depends on the child. Developing a plan to reduce anxiety. Some kids can leave class early so that they won't be in the crowded hallways. Access to keyboarding, reduced homework. Extra set of books at home is always a great idea because 9 times out of 10, they're not going to have all the materials. You know, I forgot my book, or I forgot my notebook. Sometimes seating can be a part of a 504 plan. I worked with one family whose daughter could not sit next to the heat source because that would make her tics go crazy. So that was part of the 504 plan. And notes provided is also a common one. So a very long, complicated story, put short. Students with Tourette who are achieving good grades, yes, 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 they are eligible for an IEP, or they may be eligible. I'm not saying that every kid with Tourette is eligible, but they may be eligible for an IEP or a 504 plan, even though they're achieving good grades. Here's some of the resources. Tourette is more than tics. It's pretty long, but if you're going to be asking for an evaluation, you might want to look at this because it lists a lot of the common co-occurring symptoms, and so you might say, oh, gee, I didn't realize that was part of Tourette. Understanding the education assessment. Educator's guide. This is good for educators. Obviously, it lists a lot of the co-occurring, and it lists a bunch of strategies. And again, not all the strategies are going to work for every kid. They're individualized. But this can be good for parents as well because it'll give you an idea of some of the strategies. So you may want to bring that up. The red flags is similar to Tourette is more than tics, but it's very, very brief. It's only like 2 pages. It just kind of mentions a lot of the co-occurring. IEP eligibility is not based on academics. This is from the U.S. Department of Education. The 504, if you're thinking of a 504 plan, please read the eligibility fact sheet, and I would even send it to the school because I really believe that teachers and schools aren't aware of eligibility for 504s. And we thank you. And now I guess we'll have questions and answers if anybody has any.
Thank you, Kathy, for an excellent presentation. We will now begin answering the questions submitted during the presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the questions pane in your control panel. If we are unable to get to all of the questions, we will follow up after the session with responses. Additionally, here at the TAA, we have a full-time information and referral staff available to assist you by emailing support@tourette.org or by calling 1-888-4-Tourette. So let's get some of these questions going here. So Kathy, we have someone that said, my daughter has missed 22 plus days of school this year due to seizure-like tic attacks. She is exhausted after they happen and often has to miss class. She's normally a straight A student. Now her grades are dropping due to missed instruction and depression with a lack of motivation in the evenings. She had a sudden onset tic disorder at 13 that was just recently diagnosed as Tourette syndrome. She is currently on a 504 plan. Would an IEP be better to get her help catching up?
Probably. since that is, I mean, anybody that has an IEP automatically has a 504 plan. But with something that's this significant, the first thing I'd like to mention is you talked about motivation, and please watch Ross Green's webinar about that I was on this morning, because he particularly talks a lot about motivation. You know, kids with Tourette have a lot of mountains to climb, and your daughter has additional ones. It may be that she needs to be in school just like a half a day or part of a day, and then have tutoring. She's a smart kid, obviously, but missing all that schooling is obviously not helpful. I hope they're not considering failing her, because that would be absurd. You know, why repeat a grade? What's going to change? She's still, well, hopefully she's going to stop having these specific tics. But yeah, I would talk to the school about getting an IEP, and really sitting down and talking to your daughter, and finding out what, you know, we don't include the child enough in developing plans. What would help your daughter? You know, maybe she'll say going to school in the morning, I think I can do that. Or maybe sleeping in and going to school in the afternoon. Or, you know, taking a nap in the nurse's office. What could specifically help her? And she may need some tutoring to catch up, because, you know, she's missed so many days. And I find that home tutoring lots of times is very helpful for kids with Tourette, because it's the one-on-one, and it's not the motivation, it's you know, lacking the skills. She's lacking the information because she's not even in school. So yeah, that's a hard one.
Okay, thank you. So next question here is, what are the characteristics of a comprehensive assessment for a student with Tourette syndrome?
I'm sorry, what are the what?
What are the characteristics of a comprehensive assessment for a student with TS?
Well, first of all, I would recommend that you look at the understanding evaluations and assessments. That will probably answer your questions pretty good. But it's usually a WISCAR, and there's different tools that different schools use as an evaluation. But again, I think what's important is probably the person that's doing the evaluation isn't well knowledgeable about Tourette syndrome. So one thing that we offer at the Tourette Association is talking to the schools. I have a lot of school psychologists call and talk to me about the assessments, about the evaluations. But the characteristics is really you know, they do the reading and the writing and the math, and you know, they do all the normal stuff, but they may not do processing delays. They may not do executive functioning. They may not do sensory, you know, things that may be impacting your student. So, you know, it's hard to say what a common one is, because there's no common kid with Tourette. It really needs to be based on what the parents believe to be concerns, as well as encouraging the school to give us a call and asking specific questions, so we can help bring some awareness.
Okay, so our next question here is, my son is in 7th grade and attends online public school. Are there any accommodations that are specific to online learning that could help him?
I am not real familiar with online learning. If you send me an email, I can refer you to a person that is on our education advisory board that is very knowledgeable about that. So if you want to send me an email and remind me of your questions, I can forward it on to this person.
Okay. So the next question here we have is, does a high school student in general ed with an IEP require daily resource class time? Pros and cons of an IEP versus 504 in high school.
Well, I don't know if he requires daily resource room. That depends on the student. If you know, I wonder, because the way you're asking the question, I wonder if the high school student objects to daily checking in with the resource teacher. I would want to ask the student, is it helping? And if it's not helping, what could change about it so that it could help? I mean, it's, you know, it's you want to think twice before you get rid of an accommodation or a service. So, you know, find out if it's helping the student, and if the student feels like it isn't, that it's a waste of time, then, you know, then he may not need it every day. You may want to cut it down to 3 times a week or 2 times a week. You know, it depends on the child. And the advantage and disadvantage between an IEP and a 504, the advantage of an IEP is special education services. And it's usually an IEP service usually involves an adult providing more services, because it usually involves some funding. So, you know, it's hard to say which is better. We get asked that a lot, which is better, an IEP or 504? And actually, there is a resource on our website, which is, it's asking which is better, an IEP or a 504. And if you can't find it right away, then send me an email and I can send it off to you.
Our next question is, what is the difference between a resource room teacher and a consultant teacher in high school? Is consultant teacher a universal term? Will the school know what I'm asking for?
Good question. No, it's not universal. So there are different terminology depending on the school. And some schools will tell you that they don't have consultant teachers, but they have resource room teachers. A consultant teacher usually provides a higher level of learning, whereas a resource room teacher, and I hope I'm not offending any resource room teachers or consultant teachers, because they kind of intertwine. It really depends on the school. It really depends on the individual teacher. I'm familiar with some resource room teachers that were out of this world wonderful. So they may not know what you're asking for if you ask for a consultant teacher. So what you want to do, rather than asking for a resource room teacher or consultant teacher, ask for something specific. Like, you know, my son needs extra support with developing some executive function skills. So you don't want to ask specifically for, you know, a specific person or a specific title. You want to ask for what the student needs. I mean, that's what IEP provides. It provides the unique needs of the student. So what does he need? Does he need extra help with math? Does he need, you know, help with executive function skills? Does he need help with organizing homework? You know, ask for what the child needs, and then see what they respond with.
Okay, our next question here is, can a student access the service of a consultant teacher on a 504 plan?
The simple answer is yes, but in reality, probably no. It depends on the school, because a consultant teacher needs to get paid. And so depending on the school, depending on how the school works, a lot of kids with 504 plans do get consultant teacher services. But in other schools, they would require an IEP for that. So it really depends on the school. But the answer is yes. By law, he could be provided a consultant teacher with a 504. But the reality is it depends on how the school looks at it. But if you can make good evidence that the child needs a consultant teacher or a resource room teacher, they have to provide that. So if the child has a 504 and you make a good case that he needs some support with organization or some support with extra with executive function, or some extra support with math, if you can make a good case for it and you've got a 504, they can either provide it on a 504 or the school can say, well, we need to go for an IEP then. And an IEP is not a bad thing. I know a lot of parents don't want an IEP. It's not a stigma. There's a lot of really wealthy, famous, intelligent people that had IEPs when they were in school.
Okay, so I just want to share a quick comment that someone added to the questions. They said, "Thanks, Kathy. Miss seeing you in person." And our next question here is, does a charter school by law have to allow a 504?
Yes, that's an easy answer. Yeah, because a charter school receives federal funding. Charter school is the same as a public school. So they need to allow a 504 and they need to allow services under an IEP.
Okay, what kind of accommodation can a school do for a kid that is struggling with taking notes and handwriting?
Well, it depends on the grade. If it's a young child and they don't have real good keyboarding skills yet, they may provide a scribe, somebody to write for the student. For the notes, the teacher can provide notes, and sometimes teachers will provide full notes. Other times, teachers will provide notes that have holes so that the student will read along with the notes, but the only thing they have to write is like 1 or 2 words. So it doesn't take a lot of their energy and their concentration to just fill in the holes of the notes. But providing notes is really, 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 really common for kids with Tourette.
If a child is likely to miss 10 or more days of school due to their disability, the school is required to provide a private tutor.
Is that a question?
That's a question, I think. We had come in here.
Well, that's a complicated question. Because if a child misses more than 10 days, you have to have a manifestation determination meeting to determine whether or not the behavior was related to the child's disability. And if it is, then they can't suspend the child. But if the child is suspended, regardless of the reason that the child is suspended, they don't provide a tutor, but they still have to provide the free and appropriate public education. So that may be in a different setting. Some schools have special places, special buildings, special rooms for kids that have been short-term suspended so that they can keep up with their education. Sometimes schools, sometimes it'll be home instruction, in which case the school would need to provide a tutor, but it's not a clear answer that because they're missing more than 10 days that a tutor needs to be provided. The child's education needs need to be provided. He needs to be provided education so that he can continue learning the same that he would learn in the gen ed setting, and it needs to provide almost everything. It needs to provide the important parts of his IEP. But I wouldn't say, it's not a knee-jerk answer to say yes, that they would get a tutor.
Okay, and then this will be the last question for the session. If the school has denied a 504, can the parents request another meeting to discuss again?
Yes. You may want to have additional information. I always encourage if there's been one meeting and the child has been denied either an IEP or a 504, and you want another meeting, it's nice to have additional information. What you may want to do is to download the 504 eligibility fact sheet from the website and give it to whoever is in charge of 504s prior to the meeting. Encourage them to give me a call. Be specific about what you want on the 504 plan. But if they've been denied, I can't tell you, it's very common for kids with Tourette to be denied a 504 plan, and it just boggles my mind, because it only needs to be one of the major life activities, and it's just the schools aren't aware of it. They really are not taught this stuff in college, so you might want to talk to somebody and say, gee, I went to this conference that the Tourette Association put on, and I got this really helpful resource that might be nice for you to look over.
Kathy, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. This is all the time that we have for this session. Once the session is closed, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would greatly appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of the webinar. Additionally, the webinar will be posted on the TAA's YouTube channel for those who are unable to participate today. We encourage you to reach out to us about this webinar or for other resources and opportunities to connect. On behalf of the Tourette Association, thank you again for joining us for this presentation. This presentation was presented free of charge thanks to our generous donors. If you appreciated this session, we welcome you to support the organization. May 15th, which is today, starts Tourette Awareness Month, and we welcome everyone to register to get out and get active for Miles for Tourette. Visit us at teamtourette.org to learn more and give.